If you picture Bonnie and Clyde, you probably imagine a high-speed chase down a dusty back road, two glamorous rebels outrunning the law with style. The reality is far less polished. Over their 4 active years, the Barrow Gang robbed fewer than 15 banks in total, often escaping with as little as $80 for their trouble. When they did manage a bank job, they targeted modest, rural institutions, like this First State Bank in Okabana, Minnesota. They spent most of their time starving and sleeping rough in stolen cars. To survive, they relied on trips back to West Dallas, where they would throw coded messages in glass bottles onto their parents' lawns, just to get clean clothes and a little cash. To scrape by, they held up small, low-risk targets, isolated grocery stores and rural gas stations, taking just enough cash for another day. Profit was rarely the main driver. In 1930, Clyde spent 17 months at the notorious. He was starved and violently abused by guards and inmates alike. By the time his mother secured his parole, his core motivation had shifted to exacting violent revenge on law enforcement. The Barrow Gang were traumatized, frequently incompetent drifters. Yet because of a single careless mistake in a Missouri rental, they are remembered today as icons of Depression-era style. On April 1, 1933, the Barrow Gang rented a modest furnished garage apartment on Oak Ridge Drive in Joplin, Missouri. They paid $5 in cash for the month and used false names. They were completely exhausted from months on the move. Joplin offered a quiet, unassuming residential neighborhood, and it sat right on the border, giving them quick access to 3 different state lines if they needed to run. The quiet domestic routine they craved lasted exactly 12 days. This brief attempt at normalcy led to a single mistake that gave the public a completely different version of who Bonnie and Clyde really were. Inside the apartment, they spent their time cooking, typing poetry, and playing cards. They also took out a camera and playfully photographed each other, posing with weapons to mimic the outlaw aesthetic they saw in movies. Outside, neighbors noticed multiple cars arriving at odd hours, and men who avoided eye contact. One resident tipped off the local police, who approached the apartment on April 13th expecting to find a few low-level bootleggers. Instead, they walked into a barrage of gunfire. As the officers approached the garage, W.D. Jones and Clyde Barrow opened fire from inside the building. They were using military-grade Browning automatic rifles. Constable John Harriman was killed almost immediately, and Detective Harry McGinnis was mortally wounded. Under cover of the shootout, the 5 gang members piled into their Ford V8 and smashed through the garage doors. They escaped with their lives, but left almost all their clothing, weapons, and personal items behind. By shooting their way out, they accidentally abandoned an undeveloped roll of film. That single piece of evidence would do more to create their legend than any bank robbery. Joplin police developed the film, recognized the figures, and released the images directly to the national press. The photos hit the wire services, radiating outward from Missouri to major newspapers nationwide. This timeline shows an exponential spike in mentions in April 1933. It was the 1930s equivalent of going viral, reaching millions of readers in under a month. The papers now had visual proof of the heavily armed posturing the gang had been practicing in private, like this image of Clyde posing in a suit in front of a battery of stolen weapons. One photo showed Bonnie posing with a shotgun and a cigar. It was an inside joke, and Bonnie was reportedly horrified by the image, but it cemented her reputation as a cigar-smoking outlaw queen. In a matter of days, the media used their private jokes to create a romanticized image that completely overwrote the gritty reality of their lives. The Joplin photos made the Barrow Gang famous, but they also made it impossible for them to hide. They could no longer blend into small border towns because every citizen now knew their faces. Public support vanished on Easter Sunday, 1934. Near Grapevine, Texas, they encountered 2 highway patrolmen investigating a stalled car. The gang opened fire, murdering both officers and destroying their romanticized image. The playful self-portraits were replaced by grim official mugshots as state and federal authorities initiated a relentless nationwide manhunt. Destitute and wounded, they repeatedly leaned on their families for help. This gave law enforcement the leverage they needed to force an associate, Henry Methvin, to betray them in exchange for a pardon. A posse of law enforcement officers finally tracked the gang to a rural road in Louisiana. The same photos that gave them their fame also ensured they could never hide. On a back road in Louisiana, that fame was met with a barrage of 167 bullets. Today, the apartment at 3347.5 Oak Ridge Drive in Joplin is privately owned and periodically open to the public by appointment. The original bullet holes from the 1933 shootout are still preserved in the woodwork, offering a rare physical record of the violence that occurred there. This bullet-scarred apartment is the physical location where a roll of film turned regional criminals into a national obsession.